All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space, and thanks for joining us for today's panel conversation focused on super effective facilitation and how to reach the right audience. I will be passing it over to our panelists in just a second, but first, just to help situate everyone here, we are streaming to YouTube Live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Jojage, Montreal. Just go ahead and disable the waiting room here for a sec. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating daily activities. And this week, we are collaborating with Concordia University public scholar and PhD candidate in communication studies, Scott DeYoung, for a full week of playing and questioning educational games. So welcome back to Bad Game Arcade Day 2 for those of you who are revisiting the space or our virtual space here today. Just a quick note about engagement. If you're here in person, please raise a hand during the Q&A and we'll get a mic to you so that we can hear you on the stream. And if you're joining us via Zoom, feel free to turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you want to jump in with a question. Otherwise, the chat is, of course, activated for all. All right, it's my pleasure to pass it over to our panelists now. Welcome in.
I want to thank everyone for being here, both in the chat and here in person. I'm actually really looking forward to this panel. I've been talking to people about it all weekend because it's a panel about how do we facilitate games, how do we implement games, and how do we get them to the audiences that are there. And I think when we're talking about education and games, it's a really important part because we can make a cool product, but if we can't get it there, then are we successful? So chairing the panel today is someone that I actually met at 2018 is the director of TAG, but I'm going to read their exact bio so you get all the fantastic information about them. So chairing the panel today is Rilla, Khaled, who is an associate professor in the Department of Design and Communication and Computation Arts at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, where she teaches interaction design, design theory, programming, and more. She's the director of the Technoculture Art and Games Research Center, also known as TAG, which is Canada's most well-established games research lab in the Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture, and Technology. Dr. Khaled's research is focused on the use of interactive technologies to improve the human condition, a career-long passion that has led to diverse outcomes, including designing award-winning serious games, developing a framework for game design specifically aimed at reflective outcomes, working with Indigenous communities to use contemporary technologies to imagine new, inclusive futures, creating speculative prototypes of near-future technologies, and establishing foundations for materials-based game design research. Rilla's work is super cool. I recommend you check it out. And I'm going to pass it over to you to kind of introduce all of our fantastic panelists today and have this great conversation. Thank you.
Scott, thank you so much for inviting me to chair this panel. And I'm also super excited to be here with our wonderful panelists. Today joining us, we have Effie Argyropoulos, who is a public health project lead at Digital Public Square, which is a Toronto-based not-for-profit helping communities create solutions to their most pressing challenges. She has a background in public health and COVID-19 vaccine promotion and is currently leading a project addressing COVID-19 vaccine misinformation online with a specific focus on customizing tools to suit the information needs of equity-deserving communities in Canada. Effie, wonderful to have you here. Sitting next to Effie, we've got Matt Pinchuk. So Matt is a former genetic toxicologist turned educator. He is the owner of All Aboard Games, which is an educational service provider that uses board game-based programs in elementary and high schools to promote both cognitive and social development. And then finally, we have Diogo Henriques, who is joining us via our hybrid format. So Diogo is a designer, researcher, and educator, and learner. I add learner there, always looking forward to global positive change. He's currently based at the Faculty of Arts at Aarhus University in Denmark, and has also worked at the School of Creative Media at City University Hong Kong, University of the West of England, Barcelona Tech, Studio Fuxas, Eindhoven University of Technology, and the University of Lisbon. So to all of you, welcome. I'm so happy and excited to be able to talk about learning games and facilitation with you all. So the title of our panel is Super Effective Facilitation. So given that title, I thought a good opening question for us to think about together is facilitation. What does facilitation in the context of educational games mean for you? Effie, perhaps we start with you.
Sure. I was thinking about this question a little bit, and the first word that came to my mind was co-production. And it was the idea of exactly what you said at the beginning, Rilla. It's this idea that you can have a really cool product, but if you're not co-producing it with the folks it's meant to reach, is it going to land? And so that's kind of the fundamental component to what will then be a larger facilitation of product development and ultimately uptake.
Wonderful. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, based on what we do at All the Board Games, we are selling facilitation. We're not selling the product is not a game. We're not selling a game to them, to the schools. We're having our animators or facilitators go in and teach these games and guide the students through the games and the process of them. So yeah, that's our main goal, is doing the facilitation, is implementing it. And for us, because our clients, are students from, an elementary school mostly, you're just like a teacher. You are essentially teaching them something else. Maybe it's not based on the curriculum, but it is something that they are trying to learn.
That's really nice. So facilitation basically becomes synonymous or analogous to teaching through the eyes of your target audience.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Diogo, did you have any thoughts on this one?
I would like to continue somehow this idea of the co-production and all these kind of participatory processes that they're in a group of people. There is also a facilitator, right? That normally is a person, and in the computer games, most of the times is the interface, right? So the human-computer interaction process, although sometimes there is some kind of figure, for example, that we can learn from, more human or less human. But in my view, there is this process that there is also this key element of facilitating the interaction, so the process of human-computer interaction and the interface.
What's really interesting to me, how all of your answers sort of speak specifically to the types of work that you do, which is hardly surprising, but it's nice that you bring these different inflections to the idea of facilitation. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to think about with you all is the role of domain knowledge, and specifically people who can bring that domain knowledge to our projects, which is subject matter experts. So Matt, maybe I start with you this time. How do subject matter experts play a role in your processes?
I don't know if they really do. I don't know if that fits in with what we do. I don't, I'm the subject matter expert at All the Board Games because I'm the one that plays these games and learns them, and then I want to train other people to be able to teach these games to students. So I don't require any other individuals, or I don't look for a subject matter expert because we don't design games. So we're not looking for, we're not looking for experts to help us with the theme or the goals of the games. They're already commercially available games. That's what we use. So I might not be the best person to answer that question.
No, but I think that's really interesting, because often when we think about learning games, where we're coming at it with this assumption that, oh, these are bespoke games that have been developed to specifically teach about topic X. And in your practice, it's more that you would take an existing commercially available game and then work out.
We let the game just do what it's meant to do. So engage the students and then pull out from it certain teachable moments, essentially. So it's not really what is the game about, but what does the game provide? So we're not, we're not using a game that's what I would call educational in respect to like, does it match with the curriculum or the learning objectives of this class? It's more general, and that's what we focus on. Let's use the game as a tool to teach students, how to cooperate or communicate or self-regulate or these kind of more social soft skills that I think are important. So yeah, no subject matter expert needed, really.
Wonderful. Diogo, how about you? Do subject matter experts play a role in your process?
So I'm more doing research than on games that exist than developing new games. So somehow expert knowledge is important to make this kind of analysis. But I wanted to say that, for example, a lot of generations, since there are games of people that started playing games and then went through programming or mathematics or physics. So there is a mathematical element that that is not necessarily visible when we are playing, but maybe allows the development and then turns out in a domain interest. So speaking about the audiences, I think this was an interesting point that I would like to bring to the discussion, is this, that we are also developing the audiences in some kinds of ways that can be more warlike or more mathematical-like.
Yeah. Effie, how about you?
So kind of contrary to what Matt was saying, at Digital Public Square, we very much so center our interventions around a particular topic that has some kind of misinformation, whether that's subject matter that's complex or sensitive, both. It's very much so geared to that topic. And so subject matter experts come into play very much so. In the case of the project that I lead at Digital Public Square, which is just one of our programs, we have developed a gamified approach to addressing misinformation around the COVID-19 vaccine. And so, of course, you can imagine that subject matter experts in the field of science, in virology and immunology, become very, very important, albeit not in the gaming world, perhaps, but very much so. Their knowledge, their insight, and their ability to communicate the information in an accessible way is paramount. We very much so don't want to be a part of proliferating misinformation. So that becomes one element of it, as does the subject matter experts in the sphere of the communities we're trying to reach. So they certainly might not be virologists or immunologists, but they have the cultural lens to indicate to some extent how appropriate the intervention might be, how it might resonate with their communities, and what about the design or the information we're presenting or the way we're disseminating it through our communications channels needs to change or is working for them. So in that respect, we're constantly looking to subject matter experts, however you want to define them, to drive our processes.
And do you involve them all the way through?
So that's a really good question, because I think that's come up in the fore of this program really well. The sentiment is to do so. Yeah. I think one of the huge learnings in this is that sometimes you involve them, you realize their involvement is key once something has already taken shape. So hindsight becomes 2020. It's very easy to see the parts in the program now that we would have loved to have the involvement of some of the partners that are on board today. So I think in practice, less so, but in theory, that is very much so a widely held belief. And we try to get those relationships established really quickly so that they can be a part of it throughout the life course of the program.
All right, so so let's switch now from thinking about experts to audiences. With educational games, often we're thinking about more than one audience. Like for any educational game, I mean, of course, there's your student players you're taking into consideration. And if you're dealing with children, then you're thinking about their parents as well. And then if you're thinking about a game that is, you're envisaging this being played in the classroom, then you must also think about teachers. So how do multiple audiences who potentially have different needs play a role in your processes? So Diogo, maybe we start with you for this one.
So in my case, I study somehow literature and references online of reactions to games, and sometimes also interviews and more direct contacts. And I spoke a bit in my interview, and I would like to bring this back. The case of Stanford and the development of the campus on Minecraft. And the feedback that I read, not only from the faculty, but also from the students, was also very important for the development and its implementation. So in my view, whenever I'm studying or analyzing a certain aspect, to see how it was accepted or not is always an important aspect.
Effie, how about you?
So I have kind of two responses to this because, again, in the case of the program that I'm involved with, we're thinking about addressing vaccine misinformation with the ultimate goal of improving vaccine confidence and uptake. And you know, Scott and I were talking about this before, but that idea that hesitancy is on a spectrum. And so it's not this binary thing. We need to consider different audiences and where they land on that spectrum as one point. So that's not even factoring in the sociocultural elements of different folks. I mean, it is to some extent, but really thinking about, we have a tool that delivers information that revises misconceptions about the vaccine, but we need to meet people where they're at different stages. And how that has had an impact in our processes was very much so taking that to heart and prioritizing a method to adapt what that information, or the type of information, going to different users depending on where they land on that spectrum, which is challenging to do because that's some multifaceted reasons for people's hesitancy. But what we were able to do was kind of underpin it to people's emotional response to COVID vaccines and boosters. That was ranging from indicating you're confident, indicating you're neutral, you don't really care anymore, you're skeptical, or you're angry about it. And from that, we kind of send users down a pathway of different information, and we're able to gather a whole bunch of non-identifiable insights based on which questions perform the best amongst which groups, and then further tailor the information accordingly. So in that way, we had to make game modifications and product development modifications to meet people where they were at. And then on the flip, not the flip so much, but trying to think more about folks that are most disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, by misinformation around the vaccine. What we were seeing was that we had a fairly low uptake of equity deserving folks, even from the opt-in demographic data collection we do through the tool. And as a result, that has transpired to developing customized versions of the tool in partnership with community-led organizations that can really put a community voice into the look and feel and the information we present. So it's kind of two-pronged. It's our main know it or not product that many folks here would have seen, and then there are some other pieces in development. And through those different means, we're really trying to reach a wide range of folks that have differing root causes of their hesitancy, and tailor the information in a way that's going to resonate with the reason that means most for them.
That's really interesting. I love this this characterization of the major difference between your audiences as being emotional response. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of our kind of core theories of change in it all was this idea that if we can measure emotional sentiment to a piece of corrective information, and we can see that we could see instances where that is positive, so maybe folks indicating they're happy or they feel good about the corrective information they're being presented with. We follow a theory of change that suggests their likelihood of retaining that information is greater, and then their likelihood of adopting that information is greater. So that's really valuable to us, but it's also really valuable to some of the folks that distribute our product through their networks, not just in getting better information into that ecosystem, but also in terms of driving their own communications, health promotion priorities moving forward.
Matt, how about you?
So I kind of forgot the question, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
question is, how do multiple audiences who potentially have different needs, how do they play a role in your process?
Okay, so there definitely is multiple audiences, but not for the same reason, you know?
Yeah.
The only ones that are actually playing or participating in the program are the students. So that's our priority, or I guess you could say, you could look at it like a tiered system, like that is tier one. But at the same time, I really want teachers and educators to see these programs and understand their use, and that they don't necessarily need us. They can do this on their own if they have, you know, funding to do something similarly. But yeah, just proving to schools and individual educators that there's a benefit to something like this, or just in general regular gameplay in the classroom. And then there's the parents, like you said. I want these kids to have such a great experience that they go home and they want to get these games because they want their parents to have a similar experience. They want to show them, you know, this is what I did in school and this happened in the game and it was kind of crazy, but we worked it out, and like now you're going to experience that same thing too. So again, I don't necessarily feel like I have to do much to make that happen. It's just kids are so willing to game, and so it doesn't take much of a push to get them to try and to play and to learn. It actually takes the educators longer. Teachers don't understand the rules, but the kids are picking it up because they're playing it. And then I always hear stories of kids finding the game somewhere, getting their parents to buy it for their birthday, and then their parents have no idea what's going on. The kids are like, you do this, that, and then they have a really good experience in the end. So my whole thing is authenticity. Like, let's have an authentic game experience, and that can do so much for us. I don't have to pinpoint and try so hard to do something. I just show them what's available, and now you can roll with it.
So it's almost like your tier one audience ends up doing
Absolutely
spreading the word for you.
For sure. And we've actually used that tier one audience to teach what they've done in the program to younger students. So now they become the facilitators in the program, and they get to kind of experience that side of it while they're teaching, you know, younger students, just like we did. Yeah.
Very cool. All right, let's move on to another question. So this question still concerns audiences, but audiences in a very, well, maybe the broadest sense. And I'll start with Effie for this one. How do you ensure that you're developing products inclusively?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of the things that we've put a huge amount of emphasis on in this program. In the case of us, well, I say us, I mean this particular project, like I mentioned before, we saw through our demographic collection of data, which is not personally identifiable, it's totally opt-in. So there's some room for interpretation here, but we saw a really low uptake from equity deserving community groups, specifically from Indigenous identifying folks and Black identifying folks. And so there was, it remained that challenge to make sure that we are still able to get good information out there that is well received by these communities. And I say these communities understanding very much so they're not a monolith whatsoever. There's so much diversity within these groups. But how can we just get one step further to tailoring information and developing a tool that resonates? So in our instance, involving community-led organizations that either specialize in design or have networks that they can consult on particular design elements or content elements, copywriting, has become the pivotal way forward. In our instance, that has resulted in 2 parallel processes that have resulted in very different prototypes that are not yet publicly available, but will be in about a month. And so it kind of goes back to the first point I made, Rilla, which was all around that co-production piece. From the get-go of this work, we knew that that was paramount, but through the life course of the project, it's become so apparent how much more readily it needs to be a central focus and how much from the inception of any of these ideas it needs to come into play. And so, I mean, everything from the ideation stage to the design, to the copywriting, to the user acceptance testing, all of that, that has been a shift in the life course of the project, but one for the better. And even if the end goal does not work out in the exact way we want, we have learned so much through the process that I'm very excited for the next round of projects that can apply some of these findings too.
Nice. And because I know you're not developing products,
Right.
maybe we just pitch the question: how do you bring inclusion into?
But it's, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a big part of what we do. The idea of let's play a game together is being inclusive. We're trying to make sure that every student participates, whether or not, you know, you have the cognitive skills or the social skills to do something like this. Like, our facilitators are trained to ensure that everyone is involved always. So sometimes we have these massive games. We have 12 player games, and they don't necessarily require a lot of cognition. They're very party-esque type of games. And that's how we reel in the students that sometimes feel left out. So once they play a game like that, it's a lot of sharing of information, it's laughing, it's having a good time, then they're more willing to take part in one of the more challenging games. So yeah, no, I mean, I think inclusivity is huge for what we do. That's our concept. We want kids playing together, talking to each other. We don't focus on, you know, the theming of the game being inclusive. I don't think for us it's necessary, but more the broad.
Diogo, how about you? I mean, you talked about creating audiences, which I thought was a really interesting, perhaps an interesting segue into this question. Yeah, how does inclusion figure in the way that you are involved in game development?
Yeah, so again, I'm more focused on research, but there is this aspect of the interface. So inclusion can be with people that have different views or different races or different genders, but also people with disability that play in a different way or need different interfaces to interact with the same type of game. And at the same time, I'm getting right here. And at the same time, I wanted to say, and this is a topic that is now super discussed in social media, related to AI and any kind of technology somehow, is that we can not only promote inclusion to the audiences if the process of development and the teams and the people that are developing those products, in the case here of game design, is also inclusive. So not using populations that are in countries where people receive less or not well paid, or in working environments that are not good to work. So to be really inclusive and to promote inclusion, the entire aspect, including the teams in research that are also doing studies about games in universities, have to be inclusive. And we are still very far from that, as you know.
Yeah, that's I love that point, because it really reminds us that it's much easier to practice inclusivity if you already have lived experience of what is at stake,
Yes.
and you exist in a context in which you're surrounded by diverse identities. And yeah, within our field, that is something that we can get a lot better at. But
Yes.
I'm also heartened that we are taking steps towards that.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to move on to another question now. I'll start with Matt for this one. How do you use playtests to help get feedback?
So my playtesters are my kids.
Wonderful.
But also we've done, because we use commercially available games, I know they're good games, generally speaking, but are they good for our audience? And are they good in that environment? Because we have to think about the fact that there's up to 30 students in a class and we all want to be playing at the same time. So, and can an individual facilitate that and manage or help the students manage 5 to 6 copies of the same game going on simultaneously? So yes, there is an element of play testing. The way I do it is I always start with my kids because they're kind of in the age range. Did you like the game? Was it fun? Did I find that the rules were easy to explain to you? Did you pick it up quickly? Would you want to play this again? Stuff like that. Very simple. I mean, my kids have played so many games with me, they'll immediately tell me this game is terrible or this game is great. And I know that's a great starting point for me. And then I have to actually decide whether or not this can be facilitated. So I'll approach a school and I'll ask the school, can I just come and demo a game in your classroom? And they'll usually let me, because why not? And I'll see if it works as well as some of the other games. So does my rules explanation take too long? Are the kids asking too many questions? Are they making too many errors in the game? And ultimately, was the game engaging to them? Did anybody kind of back out because they didn't find it fun or interesting? But once I've established that, if I and it's just a feel almost, I don't have anything formal, I can tell right away. Then I'll include it into our programs or cycle it into our programs as an optional game. But yeah, playtesting is huge just to make sure if it works in that system.
You're very lucky that you have kids who
They're great.
Exactly into the target audience.
My wife no, but my kids, yeah.
Wonderful. Diogo, how about you?
So can you repeat the question, please?
Sorry, the question is, how do you use playtests to help get feedback from target audiences?
Yes. Again, I'm not in the production of games to use those kinds of tests. So would be using like a post-production test of how people interact with it or how people react with it. I think this could be done more with universities. So in somehow I see here potential that doesn't exist yet, and maybe this panel and this event that Scott is organizing can also suggest that there could be multiple and positive interactions between teams that are studying this kind of aspects in a kind of more academic university way, and the people that are really developing those products and the games, and perhaps these two sides could learn from each other.
Yep. Well, maybe this is a great point to segue to Effie. How about you?
So, I mean, we, with any of the products we create, plan for user acceptance testing, where we'll put the tool in front of a distinct audience and have them answer a series of questions or have a conversation about it. That's standard practice, but I think what's a bit more interesting that is actually just built into the fiber of our products, which primarily get distributed through social media. So we have really, really high volumes of gameplays. To date, the current game's been running since November 2021. We have about over 140,000 gameplays. And part of the reason that's so interesting is because we're able to kind of test in real time how things work. Obviously, outside of our own quality assurance processes, but the idea that if we can be really reactive to new information coming up. You can imagine in the COVID-19 vaccine space, there is tons of new information coming up all the time. And we can put that into the tool itself and see how it performs. And one of the best indicators to identify how a piece of information or a new product development we've made is people's emotional response to corrective text. So when we see, we put something new into that tool and we see people indicating they're angry or they're skeptical about the results, which they do indicate, that's a big sign for us that either this is a highly, highly contentious topic and we're getting a lot of hesitant folks in the door, or there's something wrong with the way we've worded it, with the way we've characterized it or explained ourselves. And that's super interesting because it means we can adapt it really, really quickly without formalizing something. It's the audience in real time, and we can make those adjustments and see how things change.
Nice. All right. So, okay, actually, Diogo, this is probably a perfect question for you. So research on educational games, it points to the idea that we should not treat them only as black box solutions where, someone plays them and then, they just know stuff, almost like magic. Now I know stuff. So how do you design for or support learning experiences that might encompass moments of play?
Yes, so more and more there is also in AI and kind of IT development, this idea of the gray boxing or the several layers where people can somehow interact. And I remember playing with Spectrum, and where we had like the direct lines of code, and this was something that, like I was saying before, took a lot of people then to programming or things related. So I see this has a potential that sometimes these more developed games of these days don't have so much that we can see, or at least not with the expert knowledge of coding, how they were made. And then this possibility of gray boxing somehow also allows some kind of participation and in the long term, to have people interacting in the way that a certain game is made can also be an interesting topic. But again, I think it's they're still very far from that, and more and more, most of the products are very much in a kind of black boxing aspect. I don't know those people there that are creating them, how they see it, but from the audience side, seems that with more and more it's like a closed product. Or how are you developing yours?
Right, Effie, how about you? I mean, does that make sense with is it a question that sort of makes sense with the type of work that you do?
I'm not sure. I mean, read it to me again, Rilla, because I've been reflecting on it, and I think yes and no.
Well, how do you support learning experiences that would surround the media that you make?
I mean, I guess we see the whole intervention as a learning experience. It's a very distinct topic. It's looking to refute distinct misinformation around that topic and put good information into that ecosystem. But I think to evade this idea that you come across the information, suddenly you've gained knowledge and you know it, goes back to what I was sharing previously about that theory of change and about pairing that knowledge with an emotional sentiment to have a better indication of the likelihood of a player actually retaining that and thinking about it, and maybe consulting the evidence that we put adjacent to it. So, and I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but the idea, I'm with you in the sense of, we don't want to just make an assumption that a gameplay means someone has come out of it more knowledgeable, but we do have mechanisms built in to give us a better indication that maybe, in fact, they are. One thing I haven't brought up in our gameplay is the recall and the ability through that experience to be presented with information you may have previously gotten wrong and measure folks that do get that right. Now, again, that's not black and white either. There's nuance, it sits adjacent to a whole bunch of other data that we collect, but that can be one other indicator for us that maybe we're shifting the needle a little bit. The idea is not to go from a dichotomy of vaccine hesitant to now being vaccine confident after the game, although that would be great. But it is to, how can we shift that needle? How can we move someone in a more favorable direction along that spectrum so they feel equipped with the information to make good choices for themselves?
And I imagine also in your case, communities would play a role potentially as well in terms of spreading word or encouraging each other to.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's actually a really great point. And I guess that speaks more to the distribution mechanisms rather than the tool itself, although that also has a component. But really interestingly, I mean, I mentioned we do the majority of our distribution through social media, but we do have a whole bunch of community partners on the ground that send it out through their comms networks. And oftentimes what we see is through some of our key performance indicators, those shoot up in a positive way when it's coming from that trusted source. We have about, just to give you an example, about 50% of folks playing the game play right till the end. And that's kind of on a good run. But when that's coming from a trusted source, that number shoots up to 75%. Oh, wow. So it's really interesting to see that different kind of interaction depending on who is championing that information.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah, so because like when we do a program, the concept isn't for the students to learn the theme of the game or the main idea of the game. We're not focusing on that. We're focusing on everything else. And so I'm a big proponent of experiential learning, and for me, that's what they're doing through the game. So it's not what the game is about, but what are you learning while you're playing this game? And so while I think the majority of the games that we use kind of touch on a little bit of everything that I want them to touch on, like specifically social emotional learning skills, as well as some cognitive skills that are associated to education, like their math skills and their literacy skills, we don't focus on those. But some games do give us more of an opportunity to pinpoint those. And so we've been developing the program a bit more so that we can give guidance to educators that when you use this game, this is a type of skill you can focus on more just because it comes up more often than others. But yeah, that's how I see it.
Are you developing specific materials specific to each game, where you would give a teacher a pamphlet and say, this is how I would advise you play this game with your class?
So prior to the pandemic, there was a lot in place, and unfortunately it got all put to the side for a bit, but it's coming back now. So we did have a program in development that was specific for social emotional learning, because that's what we saw, especially in elementary schools. That's what they wanted, and all the programs that were there already were not genuine, at least not from my perspective. People always use games to teach social emotional learning, but the game had nothing to do with social emotional learning. It was like, let's go fishing, and you get like little fishing rod and you pull out a fish, and then there's like a role play scenario inside. You're like, why did I just fish? What does that have to do with anything? So for me, it was, can you focus on the game and the situations that are occurring within the game, you know? That person took the spot that I wanted to go to. Now I'm upset. Like that, I want you to focus on. So we did develop that, and we geared it towards lower socioeconomic schools, because that's where we found the need. And we partnered with an organization called the Montreal School for All that kind of funded these programs. And so we did them, and then pandemic hit and pause. So hopefully we'll get it up and running again, and I can test it out a bit more, and then, yeah, market it and have more schools participate. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to another question now. This one is about success of games. Okay, so like I think this is a really interesting one to think about in terms of how we normally, what would constitute success for a commercial game which is not educational versus what success means for a game that is educationally oriented. So yeah, Effie, how do you measure the success of your games?
So there are a number of ways we do. There's some fairly straightforward ways. So we look at the number of folks playing the game. And when I say those gameplays, that's getting through at least a couple of our questions, which are effectively a true and false format. We measure those. We set ourselves a target and we try to beat that, which we have so far, I'm very pleased to say. But it's not just that. That's such a small part of it. What becomes really interesting are those other metrics like completes. How many people are actually playing right till the end? How many questions does that result in? That's about 1.3 million to date, which is really cool to think about. We also want to see the % of people indicating a positive emotional response when presented with corrective information. We shoot for about 30%, and we've been seeing that number hit around 50. So that's really encouraging. And we also look for that recall rate. What is the ability for folks that do get questions wrong to be able to recall the correct information, and then even delving in deeper. So these are obviously the kind of high level figures, but the amount of insights we can draw by getting into the data a bit more can be super interesting. We see people that indicate kind of some anger or frustration towards the vaccine intentionally getting questions wrong, and that only speaks to that emotional response. I mean, we can't say for certain, but we can make some interesting inferences about it. So I think more than those actual numbers is the story that we can tell about how people are feeling about the information environment that they're in. And obviously, of course, measuring things like folks' likelihood to share with their networks, their family and their friends, and then even more, I guess, what's the word, like qualitative pieces of information, like some of the comments we get on our Facebook ads. All of that is really interesting learning and can help inform the next step we take. So all of it kind of goes into this cyclical model where we're constantly making optimizations and improvements, and all of these metrics play a role in it.
Matt, do you work with metrics when
No.
you think about games and success?
We have worked with metrics, but again, they're pretty qualitative. But what I look at is the teacher response. Because when you go into a classroom and you're trying to do something with their students, if that teacher gives you a positive response, then you know that it's successful, that you're hitting the mark. Because they know these students and they know which ones are picking things up and which ones are learning. And that's the feedback that I rely on, as well as retention. Obviously, if they, let's do the program again, or, come back next year, that's obviously a good sign for me that it's working and it means something to them, because using the students as metrics is not always a good idea, because they're games and they're going to want to play. And I made sure that we pick the ones that are fun, so they're all going to have a good time. But it's those little things. Did the teacher notice that the game focused on this aspect, or did you like the the math part of the game, you know. So that's what I use as metrics.
I love that. I love the idea of basically looking to the teacher to work out,
Yeah.
did it deliver what you hoped?
They know their kids better than I do, so yeah.
Diogo, how about you? How do you
So-
measure, how do you measure the success of the games that you work on?
So because this is also a podcast for people that may not be in academia or may not be uh, so familiar with how academic process work, I'm going to say publications. So in academia, a lot of times having a lot of publications is a synonym of a person that is a good researcher or a topic that is interesting. And one of the key criteria that made me started also seeing how Minecraft was being used was Minecraft was being published in several areas, and there were several people studying Minecraft and doing publications on it. So this is a very academic metric, but in terms of research is also important. Not only shows that there are other people that are interested in a kind of academic way, but it also brings other works that you can relate to. And this is maybe a very academic answer, but somehow reflects also how academia is structured.
Now, Diogo, I'm really glad that you brought up the idea of publications. For those of you who aren't totally familiar with, well, why anyone should care about this, for academics, it is basically our social currency, is
Yes.
publications,
Yes,
for better or worse.
and our job sometimes even.
Really, really. Yeah. Okay, so I have one final planned question that I want to pitch to you all. Are there particular critical or social or sustainability concerns that are a recurring thread in the types of games that you make or that you work with? Diogo, let's start with you.
Yes, so more recently have been really interested in how the industry of game design is relating or interacting with climate action and the ongoing climate crisis. Because we are seeing on the one side that leaders and all these events like Davos and the COPs are not really doing anything besides public discourses. And the gaming industry has a lot of influence, also economically and also with the potential of behavioral change. So I think it's really important to try to improve that somehow. And it's still at the infancy. I think there's much more to be done. And alongside the climate crisis, we are also living a societal crisis that is somehow related, but not only. The rich people after the pandemic got even more rich. The Amazons, the Microsofts, the Teslas. And the poor people got more poor. So the influence, the differences got more wide. And the gaming industry, in my view, should also have some kind of awareness and a conscience to try to change the world for the better.
Thank you, Diogo. What about the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, the themes of the games that we use are pretty lighthearted, so there's nothing too, intense for these students. That being said, I'm actually next month, February, for Black History Month, I'm actually going to pilot something in the school that I work at to see if it would fit and work. And it's using a game called Freedom: The Underground Railroad. And this is a board game based on the Underground Railroad. It's a cooperative game. And I want to see what happens when a group of teens play this game and kind of focus more on the theme of the game and the background, not so much of having a good time that now let's dive into, you know, what this game is really about and what the messages it's trying to get across.
Yeah, so what resonates or what stands out in my mind following your question, Rilla, is kind of what we've learned through our engagement with some of the equity deserving communities we're working with. Because both the consultation with Indigenous folks we've done and the consultation with Black identifying folks we've done, there was this common thread around the root of vaccine hesitancy needing to be underpinned by the history of systemic racism, mistreatment in the healthcare settings, and that any discussion, any information about vaccines, pushing whatever it might be, is incomplete without an acknowledgement of that history. And this is not novel, but it was really interesting to see two different sets of lived experiences, or arguably far more than two, but kind of having this common thread and it being all of a sudden not just a platform to counter misinformation, but another one to validate and acknowledge really, really difficult truths, and also adjacent to that, have a mechanism to leave it a bit open-ended. You know, I just spoke about all of these success metrics that are very, very quantitative, but all of a sudden we have these community groups telling us we want a platform to articulate our voices. And so in these customized tools that we're in the process of building, we have a lot more open-ended text. We have a lot more opportunity for qualitative engagement as opposed to what we've done before. And I've found that to be a really interesting component, and I'm really grateful we're taking it on. They're difficult topics. It takes it a bit, it shifts it a bit from that lighthearted, bright colors, this and that you'll see in the Know It or Not game. But I think it's important because anything less somewhat undermines the truth, and we absolutely don't want to do that. So it's really interesting. We're looking forward to seeing how it performs in real world.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the planned questions that we have. But at this point, we open up the questions more broadly. Do we have questions from the audience, either our in-person audience or the audience who is joining us online?
So I have a mic right now, so I'm gonna ask a question because I'm allowed to and I have a mic. But I will say, if you are on Zoom, you can either raise your hand or type in the chat, and I can either read it out for you from the chat, or we'll have someone else read it out for you from the chat. So, I mean, first off, thank you to everyone for sharing your thoughts. There's a lot from, I mean, I was live tweeting part of it, and I was like trying to like process what you were all talking about. And one of the questions that I'm kind of still sticking with is like, how much of the learning comes from the facilitation of like a teacher or like a facilitator themselves, and how much of the learning comes from the game itself? Like, how much are we weighing on the system that's been constructed and that the students, whatever age they are playing, and how much is it on the person who's coming alongside them as they're playing it? I don't know who wants to answer that, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that question there.
I'll answer it. Just because it sounds like what we do, like it's pretty much in that scope. So yeah, I rely on the games themselves to give the students that opportunity, to have that learning opportunity. Now, I do train the facilitators to point those things out in case they're not obvious, or to mediate some situations that might arise, because sometimes there's, I mean, we're talking about games, board games in general, and specifically, and there's conflict involved. So there's going to be moments that can get heated slightly. And so the facilitators are there to bring it down if needed. But generally speaking, the games that we use, the games will teach them the lesson, if there is one, you know, lesson to be learned specifically. But yeah, the idea of putting this type of game in front of them and having it focus on some sort of skill That's the game and not the facilitator, at least for what we do.
Did either of the other panelists want to add? Otherwise, I'll read the question in the chat.
I think I would echo that a little bit. Facilitation in the context of everything I've talked about today kind of stops beyond the trusted source that champions it or disseminates it or whatever they do. There's no one guaranteed to be there as someone is engaging with our tools. So yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of that where the last point of contact with someone else that I see in that space.
Yeah, I'm just making sure. Diogo, you're good. Thumbs up if you want to not add. You're okay. Okay, I just sometimes there's Zoom lag.
For me, we could go to this other question that is here on the chat.
I'll read the question out. It's not my question, but I see Marshall McLuhan mentioned, and as a comm student, I have to read this out. So happily we'll do so. So Marshall McLuhan famously said, "The medium is the message. If games are the medium, what do you think is the message?" It's not a hard question at all. So please, please jump in.
Play is the message.
Whoever.
There was already said in this panel that you play the game, you learn the game by playing, and this is I think one of the essential messages of any game is to play, is the action of playing. Obviously here it can be interpreted in multiple ways. This idea of the medium is the message, but in my view, the message is to play. What do others think in this panel?
Yeah, I agree. We can say that it's something more specific. Especially for something like your game, the message is kind of in your face, right? But I think, yeah, playing it is, for me, the message. I want students to play and socialize, and we're giving them a way to do so.
I'm gonna jump in and add something to that, just because, as Scott said, yeah, not a hard question to answer at all, right? I think it's also worth acknowledging that the medium is in flux. Games are changing. Also, even the types of games that we've talked about amongst us, it's very varied. But I think that that's wonderful as well. It means that there is no one message. It means that these, the sort of stock idea of what a game is, it's much more expansive and open than it used to be. So I think that also has to be part of the message, is that they do more than you think.
Yeah.
And there was this movie that of Cronenberg, The Existence. I don't know how many of you saw it. That is also about the game industry and these realities, and that in a lot of ways, at least for me, it was as a kid, and I believe it's also one of the powers of games, is to make us test things that we might not do initially in reality, but we feel more comfortable in doing in a kind of virtual or more imaginary environment. So it's also a testing space. And here and there we can test our skills, we can test our social interactions. And especially during the pandemic, we saw really the potential of that now continues somehow. So has an additional space, has an imaginary space, has a dream space where people can learn and interact and meet other people in a kind of more playing, relaxing environment than sometimes our societies that are so heavy with social norms and structures and codes and protocols that somehow we associate with being adult, that is not to play and be serious. But I don't really want to be adult if that is to be an adult.
I've learned that giving the Zoom people a few seconds of silence sometimes motivates a question. I have like 20 questions, but I'm not going to berate you all with them because that's rude. I don't know if anybody else in the space has a question they want to ask, but I'm going to just let us sit in silence before I ask another question for just a few seconds.
That's a teacher move.
This feels really
8
good, by the
seconds.
way.
Waiting time, waiting time.
I had this a little bit. I don't know if you could speak a little bit more. This railroad game that you were developing. What do players do? Could you develop a bit more? I was really curious to hear more about it. Is it about social justice or adventure, or were you exploring that topic?
Sorry, who were you directing that to? Not sure.
Diogo, was your question
Yes.
to Effie or to Matt?
To Matt. Matt was speaking of this,
Okay,
right?
sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, so can you repeat it then? Sorry, because I wasn't sure.
So it was. So how were you exploring this? It was more like a social justice or adventure or.
A little bit of
Several.
everything. Honestly, the games vary so much, and we try to design. When I say a program, it's not we go in for one hour and that's it. We come back weekly, and every week we introduce a new game, and each game has kind of a different angle to it. Nothing so bold as social justice or anything like that.
Okay.
The theming of our games are very kid friendly. But there's elements you can pull out of all of them that we want to focus on. Yeah, so some weeks, it's more like an adventuring type of game. Another week, it's more like a role-playing type of game. One week, it's just kind of having fun with words, party-style games. So, yeah.
So a variety of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We
So-
want to try and hit every skill that you can think of, especially for these students that are in school all day using these skills, and let's just practice them, but in a more engaging, fun way. I actually detest the word educational game. It's just something, when you say that to a student, we're going to teach, well, here's an educational game. I feel like it immediately turns them off. And you don't have to. I don't think you do. You can just be, this is a game. Let's play a game. You're going to learn. One way or another, you're going to learn. I don't have to tell you, this is a math game and you're going to learn math. No. We're going to play a game. Maybe you'll have to use some math, but you won't even notice it, I promise. And they don't. They honestly don't notice it. They're doing there's grade 3 students doing division, helping each other figure out how many gems we each get. And there's no complaining. And the teachers are like, what's going on? So yeah, like I said, a variety of games, kind of focusing on a little bit of everything that these kids need.
I kind of want to jump in on that because I love what you're saying. I put the entire event together because I hate the idea of educational games, hence the name Bad Game Arcade. And so I'm just, to your point, do you find that analog games are better at kind of hiding that learning component than a video game might be? Like when I look at some of the games that we're showcasing in the space and that I've come across in my own teaching practice, I find that video games typically are a bit more directive in what they're trying to get across.
Yeah.
But perhaps as someone who works in that space, what are your thoughts there?
So for sure, I've used digital games with my own kids, let's practice math. And so, I mean, it's usually like a speed thing, but there's they have to get the product of 2 numbers, but there's like a rocket ship flying around. And I never understood the purpose. I get it. We're trying to grab their attention and engagement. But they know they're doing a math game. And even though it might be fun and there may be some motivation to doing it as apart from the actual gaining mathematics skills, they're not always inclined to want to play it because it's a math game, right? But then when you introduce a game that's more authentic, more genuinely, but I know it involves math, and I know it involves somewhat complex math skills for that age group, and they do it, and it's just done. They really don't overthink it, and they they know it's a means to an end. They want to play the game, so they have to perform these operations. And they're doing it together. It's social. It's like almost like group work, which always ends up working a little bit better for certain classes. So yeah, I think there is a big difference between the analog world and the digital world when it comes to educational tools or games. Big time.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question, and then if there's no other questions in the chat,
I also have one.
please ask. Go ahead.
So I think it's really important because this panel somehow shows that there is a change. But Effie, is still the computer game world very male dominated? Effie, could you tell us your view?
I missed the last part of that sentence.
Okay.
Do you mind saying it again?
Sure. That is the computer industry still very male dominated, both in terms of the audiences and of the producers?
Yeah, that's a really good reflection, because especially coming from a public health background, which I would argue is very female dominated,
Yes.
to an environment that involves development, gamification, this whole world is very new to me. Is the question what it's like navigating that space? It's a learning, right? It's such an interesting, like, I'm looking at everything with a health promotion lens.
Okay.
And so it's just been an interesting dynamic to see all of the competing forces at play there. The emphasis on quantitative information, which is so important, but kind of interestingly, like I mentioned before, that push towards more qualitative feedback, even by the community groups we want to reach. I have found that to be an interesting dichotomy in a more male-dominated space.
Yes. But this panel also shows that there is a change, right? Because we are here like in the half. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask the final question. But if someone has a question and they are burning to get it out, please just type it into the chat and we'll make sure that it's asked. Because I did ask everyone to be here till 5:30, but we don't need to be here till 5:30. And I didn't plan on actually being here till 5:30. But in the space of like education, games, facilitation, like all the themes that we're talking about here, one of the things that I've been more casually talking with people about is there something that makes a person a good facilitator, or is it something that can be taught? Is facilitation actually something that everyone is able to do? Or is it something that certain people have kind of those skill sets to do and are maybe more set up to do it? Like, is there a space of like, can we train someone to be a good facilitator? And what does that look like? Or is it something that's a more innate set of skills? And again, I apologize if this is a hard question because I've definitely talked for hours about this with people. So try to, condense it to like 5 minutes or something,
Okay.
And I think Diogo was ready to go.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go. I don't think anything is set, so everyone can learn to be a facilitator. In fact, good facilitators can unlearn and start being bad facilitators if they are too confident and they forget to continue training and continue learning. So everyone can learn any kind of skill. I believe in that. Sometimes it depends on the conditions, on the context, on how much the person is willing to do it. And in this sense, educational games can have a really important role in this. Can be a tool for any kind of behavioral change or educational change. Sometimes realities is tough and hard, and make us believe in a different way. But I believe in that anyone can develop any kind of skill.
Maybe I can just ask a question as well, but which is building off of this one. Okay, so if people can be taught the skill, Now, what are the components of that skill? What is it that good facilitators are able to do?
For me, I'd say it's similar to what you look for in a good teacher. So like something we say with-itness. So, you know, kind of being aware of everything that's going around, kind of being entertaining enough that you can grab the attention of the people you're trying to teach. And well as knowing your material, so knowing your curriculum. I think if you have those three major skills, I think you can become a good facilitator. But to be a great facilitator, I don't think everyone can do it. I truly don't. This is a struggle that I have big time with what we do, because I have to hire individuals to facilitate and then train them. I don't really know how to train them. I can teach them the games that we use. I can show them how I facilitate a session, but they're not me, and they don't have to be, and they don't have to do things the same way that I do it. And I think I'm relatively effective when I do it, and I've seen other facilitators be relatively effective, but I've also seen some not be effective at all and kind of do things totally different than I would and fail. I haven't seen anyone do something totally different than I would and be very successful. So I kind of disagree. I don't think everyone can facilitate, at least maybe it's elementary kids, so you know that takes a special kind of person to begin with. But yeah, I don't think everyone can do it, and I really struggle with training people to facilitate programs like ours. Yeah, one of the biggest problems I have.
It's really interesting. Effie, do you have thoughts on that? Because I know facilitation means something a bit different to you as well.
Yeah. I'm leaning in the space of empathy, but I can completely appreciate Matt's tensions and like the very practical challenges with, you know, wanting a particular character and energy and I don't know, whatever is required to engage an audience, and that just not being there and being a challenging thing to just get there. And then on the flip, like I just thinking through some of the learnings we've had, which is not really facilitation, but through our co-production efforts, is how can you meet people where they're at? How can you be empathetic to the space where they're at? And how can that then guide your own efforts in facilitation or in whatever it is? Like, I guess that's a bit more conceptual than a really concrete example where you want to bring hard energy to an environment or to a situation. But I would always lean a bit to enthusiasm, I guess, and empathy, because not everybody's going to be able to bring as much of themselves to a space as maybe you can. But can you find a way around that through that means? I'm not sure. This is more theoretical than practical. I'd like to see it. I'd like to be able to give a practical example of it.
So there is a question in the chat. So I'm gonna read this other question in the chat. And so it's a question, but it's also like hearing your thoughts. So I would love to hear panelists' thoughts on how simulations might play a role in creating more authentic digital learning experiences. I think that's a question that the academics in the room might have an easier time answering than the non-academics in the room, but I can just reframe that slightly, that like I would argue that a lot of, you know, commercial board games are in some capacity, especially like Euro games, are like simulations of certain types of things. So maybe you can speak to that if you're thinking of something. But perhaps, Diogo, you might be a person that might be suited to answer this one, but no pressure.
Yes. So simulation here, it can be interpreted in different ways, right? So people can simulate also several things without using digital spaces. But yes, I would say yes, that simulation in a kind of virtual environment, that's how I'm reading it, and creating I don't know if authentic, so here the simulation and authentic in my view looks like a tension, because they would be kind of different things for me. But can create good digital learning experiences. And I don't see so much authentic in the sense that any kind of experience can be authentic, in my view. But in this case, the example that Scott was mentioning of the football games of simulations, I have colleagues that learn to play football and all the rules of football and every team player of the world because they spend hours in these simulations, and because some of these are even how to say when there is some kind of change in a team, they also change, so they are always updated. It can be a very helpful tool to learn. There is a risk, and this is studied a lot, and we saw that in the pandemic too, when a lot of us were using more virtual spaces than real spaces. That can also bring some kind of dissociation. So I think it's always important, the more digital and virtual that we go in anything, and also in learning experiences, to always balance with real social interactions, with real people, with real stuff. Otherwise, people can become detached from reality. Is Marisa here on the Zoom, right? Yes.
Do the two of you have any thoughts on that? Otherwise, I can pitch in with some thoughts as well.
You go for it.
You know, one interesting thing is how the terminology and the discourse within education and learning games has really changed over the last 2 to 3 decades. Like there was a period in time when I had just finished my PhD and I was still very much working in the space of learning games. Basically, every single academic research paper that I would find would include a sentence like, simulations provide a safe space for practicing behaviors. And in a sense, that is true. But then I always also felt like that was kind of missing the point. Like if you're someone who's thinking about a play experience, experientially, that is real. There is nothing simulated about that. And especially if you're thinking about a multiplayer experience, now that's not just, you know, an experience that exists between, you know, you and a screen, you and a device, you and your solitaire cards. Like this is a shared memory that we will have later. And so like the interesting thing about Marissa's question, it had the word simulation, simulation and virtual kind of sort of have been treated together historically. They've, you know, been tied together, but also authentic digital learning experience. And, you know, of course, these days, we don't talk about cyberspace, we don't talk about virtual unless we're talking about VR. We understand our digital experiences as being as real as everything else. So, yeah, I think these days, those boundaries have also been sufficiently troubled. So yeah, that's just a reflection on how our terminology has shifted. Yes, absolutely, simulations can play a role in authentic digital learning experience, especially if we understand that digital learning experiences are as real as you know, in-person learning experiences. Yeah,
Definitely.
And there is this several, like in this continuum of the virtual reality and the real reality, that more and more we have all these different gray areas, right? Where there you have a phone, and then you have a screen, and then you have something happening, so that there's multiple simulations, even if we see reality as another simulation, right? And that is not only focused on one, but sometimes multi-focus, and all contribute for something, right? because when I was reading simulation, I was also remembering this group of people that said that the world is a simulation and it's not real. I don't know how you call this group of people, the simulationists or something like that.
I mean, I actually think that's a really great note to end on. But I see that there's another question as I stand up, so I'm actually going to, because I did say 5:30. But the idea of simulation is actually fascinating from an academic standpoint, and I would love to talk about it all day. But there's a question here that I would love to ask. So I'm curious about the creative process of designing a game or activity using games. Is it based on your talent, research, cognitive, or neuroscience? How to go from an idea to a proposition? I think all of you could probably speak to that, but not to put you all on the spot.
I can chime in. As someone that doesn't necessarily, that is not necessarily involved in every one of these processes, what I have seen is kind of a lot of the components mentioned in that question. There's the theoretical underpinning of understanding in our context that we want to take a refutation as a model for misconception revision, and that we've tried in a controlled environment using randomized controlled trials to understand how gamification significantly impacts that positively. So there is that theoretical piece. And then there's the idea, at least in my context, of having tried and tested a product in other contexts, developing a rapid learning tool. And when topics that have a lot of misinformation circulating around them come into the fore, how can we adapt and consider all of the different components so that we're not dragging and dropping a one-size-fits-all everywhere, but we're taking kind of a shell and a theoretical underpinning and doing the work needed in that given environment to make sense of it and make it applicable, or learn that it's not applicable. It's kind of blue sky and vague, but I hope to have captured some of that.
Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah, I can repeat it. So I'm curious about the creative process of designing a game or activity that uses games. Is it based on your individual talent, research that you've done, cognitive ability, or neuroscience ability? How do you go from this idea to the actual proposition?
For me, it was none. None of those things. Not for a minute. It was more of like a passion. Games brought me a lot of joy. I played games with my friends and my family, and I wanted to see if I could spread that. And so that's what I relied on. Is there a way to just bring this joy that I'm having to others? And so designing the program was not very complicated. It was implementing it was the tougher part, and making it something that could be sustainable for myself. But no, creating it was fun and easy. Yeah.
I don't know if I can also add an aspect with the recent study that I'm doing with colleagues from Hungary about startups in the gaming industry. That sometimes is also about funding and having the right structures that allow people to thrive in a kind of idea and do their idea of business. So sometimes it's also to have the right people believe in you. And this can be with funding like money, but can also be with people that believe in your ideas, people that open doors for you, with people that connect with you, with the right other people. So it's also a collective endeavor. Sometimes there are very interesting ideas made by people with a lot of skills, but they cannot make it because there were structural barriers that didn't allow something to thrive. Because we are speaking, game design has an economy, right? Has being your work, not part-time or a hobby.
All right, so I think that brings us to the end of today's session. I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. So thank you, Diogo, thank you, Matt, thank you, Effie, thank you so much for the conversation, for the broad range of topics that we've covered, everything we've talked about. I want to thank you, Scott, for organizing the Bad Game Arcade, and also thank you, Fourth Space, for hosting this event. Thank you, audience. Thank you, audience, for the questions. And listening, the attention. All right, that's it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you for greetings from Denmark.